I on?
Incidentally, Marty has told me that the best part of his talk is the questions that come from the audience. So please take note.
Well, I can't express how honored I am to receive this award, and especially because Ibuka-san was an engineer. You are all engineers, and it's my judgment that the problems of the world today are not going to be solved until they become crises and they come to us engineers and tell us we got to solve those problems. So it makes this whole award very special to me. I'm especially grateful for your comments, Peter, to Rush Shields for nominating me to this award, and for the IEEE to give me the award. I am going to talk a little bit about history for a few minutes. I want to tell you what my predictions for the future are with regard to wireless communications. And I'm going to try to be as brief as I can because I really enjoy Q&As, as Peter just said, and much more than I do speaking. So, and the more challenging and embarrassing your questions are, the more delighted I will be. So let's see if you can take that challenge on. Something over 40 years ago, my colleagues and I at Motorola jump-started a revolution. We know it was a revolution because a revolution is defined as some event, some service, some technology that changes the behavior of a lot of people in a meaningful way. Well, you can't argue that cellular telephony has been revolutionary. There are more cell phones in the world today than there are people. There are some 4.5 million people in the world today that use cell phones. Truly a revolution. Of course, some years after that revolution occurred, we were told that there was going to be another revolution, digital. Well, I'm still waiting for that revolution to happen. And I ought to mention, by the way, you want to talk about serendipity, as I stood up to come on this podium today, this button came off my coat, and I can't break it off. So it must be a very strong thread. So as you see this thing dangling here, you'll know that it's not some new technology. It really is just a button. Why did we build that first cell phone? Well, I'd like to say that it was because we were trying to do a breakthrough. That wasn't the case. As Peter indicated, Bell Laboratories invented cellular, the concept of cellular. But their version of cellular telephony was, would you believe it, car telephones. Here we had been trapped in our homes, leashed to our desk by that copper wire for over 100 years, and now we were going to be trapped in our cars. And we believed, we and my colleagues at Motorola believed that the time was ready for the freedom that comes from the ability to be able to communicate everywhere at any time. We were just a little company in Chicago, facing the biggest company in the world in every measure. And that's when I decided we had to do something really dazzling. And we actually built a cell phone back in 1973. And that's what it looked like. This phone weighed over 1 kilo. It had a battery life of 20 minutes. It turns out 20 minutes was very adequate because you couldn't hold this heavy thing up for 20 minutes. And we succeeded. When the rules were written, the industry decided that portables were ready. The rules were written to permit portables, and this revolution was underway. As I mentioned before, I'm still waiting for the next revolution, and I think it's about to happen. I think that wireless telephony is going to be the fundamental solution to three of the biggest problems that we face in humanity today. What are those problems? Healthcare. We are now spending something like 17% of our GNP in the United States, 17%, going close to 20. That means every dollar of wealth that we create out of our natural resources, out of our manufacturing capability, goes just to healthcare. And that number is increasing, and if we don't stop it, it's going to reach 30% within 10 years, and that's just not sustainable. Education. There is an opportunity in the area of education to increase our ability to educate people by orders of magnitude. And the problem is that in order to do that, we're going to have to use new technologies, and we haven't yet figured out how to make these new technologies available to everyone. So could you imagine, we have now discovered that somebody who is educated with all of the techniques that are available today, think about kids playing games today, where they can operate these games at any time, not just when they're at school. The games challenge them. If they reach a point in the challenge where they can't beat the game will shunt them off to the side and let them do something different. If we build an educational system based upon these kinds of principles, continuously challenging, we've discovered that people's brains actually grow more rapidly in this challenging situation than they do otherwise. Well, let me pose an engineering problem to you. Can we have a society where people who have access to the latest technologies in education have bigger brains than another segment of population that don't have access to technology? And I suggest that that's just not an acceptable situation. There is an engineering problem. What's the biggest problem we face today? Anybody want to volunteer and answer that? What's the, sir? I think it's the difference between the haves and the have-nots. It's poverty. And I would suggest that there is a solution to the issue of poverty, and that solution is very much based upon communications. And the one word that describes what that solution is collaboration. We are, at the moment, we're using social networking more as a game. But think of what's going on now. People are now starting to learn how to communicate with each other much, much more efficiently. And efficiency is the name of the game. If you look at the issue of poverty, there are only two solutions. One is that we take the overall wealth of the world and redistribute it. Well, that's a great solution. Now we'll all be poor. The only real solution is to make that pie bigger. And the only way to do that is to increase productivity. And there's no question in my mind that the concept of collaboration carried to its limit is going to do that. The way I describe that is by looking at the inefficiency that we live through today in the corporate world. And I would suggest that most of you are either now or have been in the corporate world one time or another. And we have a concept called the corporate meeting. The corporate meeting is when a group of people are gathered together to solve a problem or to make a decision. The typical way that the meetings are set up, well, by the way, one of the principles of this meeting are think out of the box. Well, the first thing we do is we start creating boxes. Because when you invite people to the meeting, the first thing you look at is the organization chart, boxes. Then you have to pick a time. That's a limit. There's a limitation there. Pick a place, find the conference room, one box after another. And by the time you get done, you put all these people in the room and you tell them, all right, people, we have 1 hour, think out of the box and come up with a solution. How do I think that problem is going to get solved in the future? First of all, we still need somebody to identify this problem or come up with a decision. The first thing that person does is find out who are the people that are going to solve this problem. Well, we have tools for that now. We have things like LinkedIn. I'm not suggesting we're going to use LinkedIn, but there are databases that are based upon what the qualifications are of people who can solve these problems. How about the time and place? We don't have to worry about that anymore. If we have short communications, if somebody has an idea and they want to share it with other people, well, we have things like Twitter that are examples of how to do that. You want to trade papers, pictures, well, we have things like Facebook. We have search engines like Google. People can now, the group of people who are most qualified to solve this problem or to make the decision now can communicate with each other 24/7 wherever they are in whatever the optimum way is. I would suggest that this is orders of magnitude more efficient than anything that we ever done in the past. And what will the result be? I think we are going to lose the whole concept of the hierarchical organization. It's going to take a long time for that to happen because we have all kinds of institutions that are deeply embedded in our society, but it is going to happen. People are going to rise to the jobs that have to be done independently of organizational structures, of organization charts. Healthcare, I think you've read about the fact that we can now measure all kinds of things on the human body. We don't do it very effectively now, but there are devices available now that will do an EKG, that will measure your pulse, your respiration, your body temperature. We're coming very close to be able to measure your sugar level. And all of these things theoretically could be measured on a continuing basis. Why should we do this continuously? Well, think about how we've done that in the past. We've done it with the annual physical examination. Now, I get an annual physical every 5 years, whether I need it or not, but you discover that physical examinations are essentially worthless. The only function of an exam, physical exam, is that it does get you to go talk to a doctor once a year. But how does the doctor know what is normal for you? Well, he doesn't. The only way to know what is normal for you is to measure you on a continuing basis. And there is the potential now to have a physical examination every minute. And that physical examination can examine your statistics, your body can create a norm for you. You couple that with the information you get from the genome so you know what things that you're susceptible for. And we have situations like an individual who is susceptible to congestive heart failure. Where's a sensor? The sensor measures the amount of fluid in the person's lungs. When that fluid ever starts accumulating, a computer analyzes that result, warns the person, and keeps the person from going to the hospital or potentially dying. We're very close to being able to do these things. Still a lot of work to be done. I'm wearing a watch now that ostensibly will measure a whole bunch of these things. And one of these days, I'm actually going to figure out how this watch works, because I can't work it now. And by the way, I also own, this happens to be, I shouldn't mention any brand names, but this is called a 360, but I have a Sony watch, I have a Garmin watch, and I can't work any of them. We've got a ways to go to be able to do these things, but it's going to happen, and we are going to solve the healthcare problem. We are going to move education to a new and higher level. And ultimately, we engineers, you people in this room and all of your colleagues throughout the world are going to take on all of these big problems and we are going to solve them. And when that happens, I hope you remember that Marty told you about them first. So thank you very much, and the floor is now open for questions. Nobody ever asked the first question, so we'll dispose of that. Stu, you're going to ask the second
Anybody
question.
have a question for Marty or comment? So, Bob?
Okay. How do you think the shift from the frequency paradigm to packet paradigm will affect connectivity?
I'm sorry, did you get how do you get that? Yeah.
Okay. We seem to be shifting from a frequency paradigm for communicating to the packet paradigm of the internet. How do you see that impacting what you do in connectivity?
From frequency to packets.
How do we shift from
What's the impact?
of shifting from frequency to packets? Well, listen, you want to talk about the way in which you measure the details of how you measure these things. The important thing is efficiency in using the radio spectrum. And I don't care how you do it, you just have to get more efficient, because at the moment there is a myth that goes around that says that the radio frequency spectrum is like beachfront property. There's only so much. Not so. You know that that's the case. You know that that I did some measurements, actually some observation that said that from the time that Marconi started to use radio to now, we have improved our throughput of the radio spectrum by 10 trillion times. There is every reason to believe that we can keep doing that, and it's a lucky thing, because somehow we engineers are just barely keeping ahead of the need. There's never been a shortage of radio spectrum. Anybody that tells you that that's otherwise are wrong. Anytime we want to do something new in the radio spectrum, somehow we find a hunk of spectrum, but we keep finding new things at an increasing rate. Therefore, we have to increase the capacity of the spectrum, and the tools are there. The tool that has not, the biggest available tool is smart antennas, MIMO. You've all heard of that. MIMO itself will increase the capacity of the radio spectrum by 100 times and more. The next tool is cognitive radio. You've all heard about that too. That combined with MIMO will give us another few hundred times. And then you put on top of that the ability to actually understand what the environment is, and have every user use the optimum spectrum for only the time that they need it, for only the area that they need it. And by that, if you do all of those things, technologies that we know about today, there is a potential for another trillion times improvement in capacity. So this whole concept of scarcity of spectrum is it's a fraud. Doesn't exist. We know how to solve that, probably will. The whole idea of licensed versus unlicensed, you've all heard of that thing. Net neutrality, all of those things go away. If you have an infinite amount of spectrum, you don't worry about net neutrality. Everybody can use whatever they need. You don't worry about exclusivity. You'll have everything is going to be unlicensed in the long term. So that was a superb question. Yes, sir. Thomas.
In 5G, we not only talk about more throughputs, we also talk about connecting, moving things with ultra-low delay wireless. Where do you see the challenges in making ultra-low delay wireless work? Ultra-low delay for connecting robots, cars, so that cars could drive in a convoy, etc., etc. Where do you see the challenges there?
When is all that going to happen? Is that what you're asking?
Well, where are the technical challenges to make it work?
First of all, there are very few technical challenges, especially if you live in my world. I live in a world of the future where all of these things that we now dream about that are scientific, that we really know about, and I know they are all going to happen. It's the social problems that we have to solve. And when I talk, for example, about the healthcare issues, we're going to solve all the sensor problems. We haven't figured out how to solve the legal problems yet. we also haven't figured out how to solve the microphone problems. So it is those social problems. It is getting people to adapt to the technology, and people are very, very conservative. It doesn't seem obvious, but technology is always way, way ahead of what people can accommodate in the way of. So all of these things are going to happen, but my view is they're going to take generations. Now, does that mean that we have to stop working on it and wait for the next generation? Not at all. We really have to work on it. But every time people talk to me, when I look at the difficulty I'm having with my electronic wristwatch, I think about people that talked to me 45 years ago. I walked into a laboratory, and I was given a demonstration of voice recognition, and it worked almost. And the people said, well, we just need a little more processing power, and we're going to be able to have very good voice recognition. Well, it ended up taking 30 to 40 years for that to happen, and today we have pretty good voice recognition. But these little minor problems and the social problems are the things that we have to overcome, not the big technology problems.